Renaldo, thank you for being here, my friend, founder of PetPlate. It's so good to have you on the show. We got to start with the now because I think normally people want to start from the beginning, but the now is where a lot of businesses, especially small and new, like a PetPlate, would have been impacted severely during COVID. But your story is a little bit different. So I want to hear how you all have been doing now.
Yeah, of course. First, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and to tell everyone a little bit about PetPlate and my journey as a founder. But really, just jumping right in with COVID, we've been very fortunate at PetPlate. As you mentioned, many small businesses have just been ravaged as a result of the pandemic. But PetPlate, and we'll get more into the business model and why we set it up the way we did. But we're a direct consumer business, so we ship directly to our customers' doors. So at the start of COVID, we luckily were a solution for many people who didn't feel comfortable, didn't feel safe for obvious reasons, going to the store to get their pets food. Because of that, we saw rapid growth at the beginning of March, really, when the shutdown started happening, all
Yeah.
the way through, until kind of the end of summer. Then things started to level off as places started to open back up. But we
Hmm.
were lucky that we converted a lot of people to really a new way of ordering and getting their pets' food delivered directly to them.
When
That
you initially launched the company, then is that something you already had in mind? Was like we should already start thinking of maybe a plan B for people who just want food delivered to their house instead of having to go to stores?
Yeah, I'm a tech geek. So at the end of the day, when I was starting the business, only doing it as direct to consumer was kind of how my brain really
Yep.
worked. Uh, yeah, obviously we could have kind of built inventory and sent it directly into stores, as a lot of brands typically start out as. But I saw the opportunity, particularly in 2016, of starting a business as a digitally native brand, and that's what excited me.
Yeah.
I started teaching myself how to code. That led me to making a website. So naturally, I wanted to sell the product online, and that's really what we did. And
Yep.
I guess we just ended up being very lucky, because you can't predict obviously such a black swan event happening, but it
Mm.
was just a huge boon for the business. And the last thing I'll add is I think a lot of people went out and adopted dogs for obvious reasons,
I
being
know.
home more, etc., wanting that companionship. I think is super important. Pets obviously deliver that. So if
Yeah.
any men of the hour listeners have just got pets, definitely make sure you're checking out PetPlate. We can
Yeah.
definitely make the whole pet food experience a lot easier for you.
I didn't think about that. You're right. I even looked into getting a pet last fall for a
Shelters are empty now,
dog.
which is great, because
Exactly.
obviously there's a huge rescue issue in the U.S. in terms of how many dogs are just kind of sitting in shelters waiting to be adopted. But uh,
Well,
kind of coming out of the pandemic, many of them were left empty, which was a little silver lining there,
mhm.
for us dog lovers.
Oh, I know. There's a lot of silver lining right now. One of which is the fact that we're kind of able to do a little bit of anything and everything. And you said you were coding, you built your own website. So when you
Sure.
first started, you probably started in a more because you're digitally focused. I could imagine when starting a business how that allowed you to probably pick up some speed a lot faster in terms of getting the company off the ground, Pet Plate as a whole. So where did it all start? Let's now go back to the beginning because I'm curious, when you have such a digital savvy mindset, you don't necessarily need to hire a coder, a website builder, a marketing person, essentially off the front end. But how did you start? How many people do you start with? And then
Yeah.
from there, tell us about how you kind of built everything over the past, what is now probably 5 years almost.
Yeah, going on about 5 years. And, really, I guess going all the way back, I graduated from MIT, I studied physics, and, that really sets up kind of, the technical mindset that I have that I typically try to attack most problems
Mhm.
with. And after realizing I wasn't going to solve string theory, I went to become a consultant. I worked at McKinsey and Company for a number
Mm.
of years, transitioned into private equity. And just throughout the early part of my career, I ended up just by happenstance consulting with a lot of pet food companies. Long story short, I saw all of the ingredients going into pet food, from
Mm.
the raw ingredients all the way to the kibble. So really just working at traditional pet food manufacturers.
Mm.
And if you haven't really done any research on what you're feeding your pet, what typical kibble or canned dog food is made out of, I won't gross anyone out, but make sure you go look at that. Most of the ingredients are what they call 4Ds, so dead, dying, disease, and disabled animals. So stuff that's outside of the human supply chain. It would
Wow.
never be able to set foot in manufacturing facility that is making human food. And when you see all of this and you really get on the factory floor, it was just a little bit shocking for me. And that led me to think, oh, wow, is this what I want to feed my dog, my first dog,
Mm.
Winston? And I started cooking for him. That led me to kind of seeing the benefits that that ended up having in his health. And I kind of started PetPlate out off of that. I had a little bit of background in terms of what the market was and why this might be an exciting thing to go launch. But really, it was just, oh, I'm cooking food for my dog. He loves it. I'm sure there are millennials all around the country that would love it. And that was the start.
Mm.
And, I, was, teaching myself how to program, as I mentioned earlier. And this was
Mm.
just kind of a fun project for me that kind of started building up over about a year or so while I was a consultant.
Mm.
And then once I felt kind of some confidence around the actual product I'd built, I started working with the veterinary nutritionist to make sure the meals we were designing were complete and balanced. It's kind of the terminology we use in the industry. That was kind of just enough confidence I had to quit my job and start biking around New York City delivering dog food, which was really about kind of the thought I had put into it at the time. And, things started, yeah, I think I picked the right industry at the right time. It was a really exciting idea. And there's a lot of momentum that kind of quickly happened after I launched that I'm sure we'll talk through throughout the rest of the podcast. But that's really how it got started. It was an interesting side project for me,
Yeah.
something I was doing that was fun for my dog, and really just kind of took on a life of its own pretty quickly.
Were you at first making the food for your dog? I heard a lot of people get into that now. They want their dog to eat as healthy as possible. And sometimes that means you're cooking the dog food. Is that what you had to start doing?
Yeah, that's really what I started. And, my roommates at the time didn't like it. Yeah, it's
Why
not
are
that
you
it's even
cooking
like
your
much of
dog
a
food on this?
mess or anything, but, you're cooking a lot of ground beef or ground turkey. You're mixing in the rice and peas, etc. Right. So it's a pretty simple thing to kind of
I want to eat
meal
that. Why
prep
don't
in
you
a way.
cook that for me?
It's really healthy actually. It kind of, and honestly, is good of a cook. I'm not that great of a cook, so I was honestly making meals like that anyway for myself.
Yeah.
Chilies and things like that. So it was pretty easy to make food for my dog at that point, and
Mm.
you know is the excitement they get when you're doing it, and then they kind of eventually know you're making food for them, or they know you're going to the refrigerator to get their food. They're very
Huh.
smart in that
I would
sense.
say.
So that just, I think, connection that I
Mm.
built between me and my dog at the time, Winston. Now I have a new dog, Cooper, who is a huge Pet Plate fan. That just like really, I think, just gave me a lot of the confidence needed
Mm.
to go start the business, and that other pet parents would want the same products for their dogs that I did.
Cause I mean, listen, confidence is key when you're starting a business, but you were riding a bike delivering these actual food products to people. How was that?
It was fun, to be completely honest. Now the business is very different. We ship product directly to your door using UPS, so you get a nice insulated box. The meals come in individual containers. Right, they're made at a USDA facility. We're the only
Mm.
pet food made at that facility, made alongside human food that you would be finding at Target, Whole Foods, etc. So
Yeah.
the business now is very, very different than it was when I would go to a commercial kitchen in the morning, whip up maybe 20, 30 pounds of dog food, go deliver to some clients in the Upper West Side, and that was it. Uh, but it was fun.
Right.
It was great connecting with the early adopters, some of which are still ordering Pet Plate today, which is exciting,
That's
like five
great.
years later. So yeah, it was really just able to kind of get into the mindset of the early founder experience of building the business, figuring
Mm.
out how to pivot, finding that product market fit. It was just an exciting time, and it was really just myself at that point. I had a small team of people helping me in the commercial kitchen, some of which also are still working for PetPlate, which is great. So we were able to build from that base over time, but it just started really small, and it was just a fun time. When you're making dog food and biking around the city, there's not too much that you can't enjoy.
And
So
then
it
it
was a
grows
nice
from
fun
there.
time at that point.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned your team. We'll talk about your team in just a minute because there's a lot that goes into building a team, finding the right people. And then I even have a question to you. And I cannot wait to get your thoughts on it. But when you have to let people go or when you have to figure out a
Yeah,
new way of navigating a team and the
yeah,
systems within. Ronaldo, I want to talk about the mission and purpose of a company like PetPlate. I can only imagine, especially since you had your dog and you were cooking for your dog and then you wanted other people to do the same and then you went to go bike and deliver the food to them. That's how passionate you were about it. But when people think to launch a company, I think far too many times they forget that you need a why and you need a very strong mission and a value proposition for not only your customers, but for your team and yourself to continue building that company. Could you walk us through that and how you kind of established what your mission would be while continuing to build PetPlate?
Yeah, and the mission really evolved a little bit over time, but I kind of just went to the what is PetPlate and what are we trying to do? What's motivating me to quit a job and then go, try and launch this business? And
Yeah.
yeah, it really boiled itself down to I wanted to make sure that people had the ability to feed their dogs healthier, more nutritious food than what was currently available on the market. So that's not a very nicely worded mission. We have a nicer one, now about delivering like exceptional quality dog food and giving customers back time, right?
Mm.
Time that they now don't have to associate with like prepping and research and all of that stuff. But very simply, I just thought about what would I try to get out of the product or service that I was offering, and really it was just the higher quality food and really
Mm.
simplifying the nutrition process for pet parents. So with that, it really kind of set around kind of I think the guardrails for the brand, the
Mm.
sacred cows, so to speak, in terms of the ingredients we would use, how we would make decisions moving forward as it related to whether it was packaging, delivery mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to really set that, mission and vision for your company and then use that as you're, just going through the process of, evolving your product or service.
Mm. Mission and vision. Ooh,
Yeah.
it's got a ring to it. Mission and vision. Entrepreneurs listening right now, that's something I feel like a lot of people who want to start something for themselves, Ronaldo, think about. They're like, well, I want to launch a company, or
Mhm.
I want to launch a brand, or I want to elevate my brand, whatever that might mean. But I promise it starts with your mission, because then you get to wake up every single day and realize you're doing exactly what you want to be doing for the
Mhm.
right reason of what you've established, which you said is your
Yeah.
mission and vision, and then bringing that full circle. Let's talk about the team,
Mhm.
because I can only imagine when you, as someone who owns a company, founded a company, like the operations get so immensely deep, and like pretty much how you guys have to operate every single day has elevated, because what do they always say, the more customers you end up getting, the more the more
Yeah.
that you guys end up getting on your
As
plate.
Biggie said, what, more money, more problems,
More
right?
money. I
Sorry.
was
Sorry, that just
say
popped into my
more
head. I
money,
had
more
to say it.
problems.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say demand, supply and
Yeah,
demand, more supply
there
and
we
demand.
go. The economics version, Biggie Smalls would have said that.
When you had to hire your first person, what was that experience like?
Yeah, this is very interesting. I would say hiring for me was very difficult. And luckily, I've been able to find and align myself with business partners where that was actual skill that they had. But hiring, is a skill and it's super important.
Mm.
Again, going back to myself before I started PetPlate, I was a consultant, so kind of a hired gun. Uh, Always worked on a small team, had not hired anyone, was never anyone's manager or anything like that.
Yeah.
So wasn't really a skill set that I had. So now I realize how important it is to make sure when you're hiring roles, you have, the role clearly defined in terms of what you're
Mm.
looking for. You spend time, networking and interviewing and making sure you find the right fit for the role. Because
Yeah.
as I learned the hard way, once you make a hard hire, or sorry, once you make a bad hire, it's very, very hard to reverse that. It took us a while before we were able to find what we like to kind of say is the core team. So
Mm.
our exec team, so it'll be myself, our CEO, our COO, CTO, et cetera, kind of that C-suite.
Yeah.
We are really just wrapping that up kind of 5 years into the making. And there have been some starts and stops along the way of people that were parts of the team and then later decided to leave. But
Yeah.
so that's been definitely difficult. But
Mm.
now as we've been able to just grow as a business, people know about PetPlate. We've just been able to leverage our network and find really good people that are passionate about our mission and vision, and
Mm.
that way we're always aligned. So that's been very helpful. But you always have to dedicate a lot more time than you're going to think, and untying those bad hiring decisions is a lot more costly in terms of
Yeah.
time than you would probably imagine.
Mm. And having a strong enough vision before you go set forth to hire people too, to make sure that Everything kind is as aligned as possible, I think is a very smart tactic for
Mhm.
anybody. But yeah, because that's a lot. And then so I mean, at one point it was just you,
Yep.
and then it was now you have this team. Could you describe your hardest day to us as an entrepreneur?
Wow. So, there are a lot. There are a lot of hard days, but I think probably one of our hardest days was man, it's even hard to kind of think about because like you go through just so many ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
Throughout like the overall process. But I think going back to like our Series A fundraise, so going into the pandemic, we closed the Series A with like a bunch of amazing investors. It was a $9 million round, but that was a long round for us to put together. Right, we got a lot of no's before we eventually got the yeses. And for example, General Mills came in and they co-led the round with a great family office. As I mentioned, it was like $9 million. But I remember just like a string of no's we got kind of like exiting the summer of 2019, where it was like, oh, we've built like such a big business, right? We're being capital
Yeah.
efficient. We're doing all the right things. We have customers that absolutely love us.
Yeah.
Um, and we just couldn't find the investors that kind of also believed in and supported the business at that point in time. They'll help us kind of reach that next level. So that was very difficult, right?
Mm.
Just getting those no's, responding to that feedback, wondering if there was something that we were doing wrong, something we weren't communicating properly, and just constantly going back out there. That was
Mm.
hard, right? Getting shut down, but getting back up and going back out and continuing to pitch while trying to run and grow the business.
Yeah.
That was definitely very difficult. And I would say to any aspiring entrepreneurs, you have to be ready to hear the no's,
Mm.
because you get a lot of those before you get the eventual yes.
What's been your best yes so far?
Yeah, the best yes. You know, uh, yeah, I hate to sound
Even if it's your dog saying, "Yes, thank you for giving me that food."
I hate to sound corny, but literally the best yeses are I still get to my email every survey that goes out to one of our customers. So if you're listening and you order PetPlate and you order, we're going to send you a customer satisfaction survey.
Yeah.
Everything you say, I read them all. Uh, so when I get one of the 5 stars and we get a ton of 5-star reviews, that's what brightens up my day and is the yes. It's kind of hearing it directly from the customers because
Yeah.
then we know we're doing something right. We know we're making a difference in the pet's life, which is exciting. But then it's just great feedback, right? It
Mhm.
acknowledges all the work we've been doing for the past 5 years is paying off as we start to see more and more of those fives kind of come in and more of
Yeah.
the threes turn into fours, fours turn into fives. So I really enjoy that. So that's the yes I care most about. And I feel at the end of the day, that's the one the investors are going to care most about as well and will help continue to fund and power the business forward.
5 for 5.
Yeah.
Mission and vision, and
Yeah.
then 5 for 5. Those are
Exactly.
already 2 very powerful statements coming out of this conversation. Your story is so incredible because I can't stop picturing you here in New York City on a bike carrying or pretty much carrying, I guess, in a basket or in a backpack, the food that you were making to then deliver to customers, and then 5 years later being able to say that you guys are in a full operation. I'm sure you have, like, a warehouse of some kind. You have this team that's distributing everything via UPS, and that's
Yeah. I mean, when we started, we might have been making 25 pounds of food a day. And
yeah.
now it's, a single batch and we're doing multiple and multiple across like, the span of a day. It's 3,000 pounds. Right. And yeah,
Dang.
honestly, I mean, we're putting in almost more food in a box that goes out to our, tens of thousands of customers every week
Yeah.
than we were making one in one day in the commercial kitchen when I first started. So it's kind of crazy just to see that scale. And all the fun things that we were able to do like that help power that, whether it was being on Shark Tank, which we haven't had a chance to talk about
We're
yet.
getting
That
to it
was
right
Yeah, that
next.
was an
Yeah.
interesting no. I forgot when the Sharks told me no. And it was a great yes when they came and asked us to kind of go back and give an update. So yeah, it's just been a long, fun journey, but you just try to be present in a moment and
Yep.
take it for what it's worth.
Take it for what it's worth. I was going to ask you your craziest story, and then we will get to Shark Tank, but I'm almost curious to know if Shark Tank has been your craziest story on this 5-year adventure.
Definitely. And to put it in perspective, started the business in early 2016, biking around New York City, just having a fun time. Just started business, so you have
Casually
that.
leaving my job as a consultant. We're
Yeah,
biking
you
around.
know, you have that new business high that you're on, and I am at what they call New York Tech Day, which is they rent out most of the Java Center, bunch of businesses. You have your booth. Yeah, your people are coming by, passing around their resumes. You're talking to other clients, people trying to sell you stuff. It's a really fun environment. Shark Tank is there accepting new entrepreneurs to come pitch their producers. So I sign up on a whim, not thinking it's going to go anywhere. I go, I give the PetPlate pitch. Apparently, they end up loving it. I get a call a couple of weeks later that I'm moving down the round of interviews, and they give you the application to fall out. So I kind of, went like, kind of cut through the noise a little bit in the application process, which was
Mm.
exciting. And then, before I knew it, I was flying out to LA just to go pitch to the Sharks, etc.
Yeah.
That ended up just being, I think, one of the most memorable experiences right now of my life. And I think what was particularly fun and probably like the best moment was when I got to feed PetPlate, so the dog food, to all the Sharks. Mark Cuban asked for seconds. I think this was before he became a vegan, obviously.
Right.
So that was a fun experience. Producing and making the dog food in a small little like LA kitchen before going to feed it to these multi-millionaires who I'm hoping will want to invest in my business. I
Yeah.
believe Chris Sacca, one of the early investors of Uber, was a guest shark on that episode. So it was like a really interesting and just momentous time.
Yeah.
And it was fun being out there pitching the business. Unfortunately, they all said no. So that ended up being like not a very fun experience. Like as it started to like wind down, and the flight back to New York was super lonely. But it eventually turned itself
I'm gonna
around, and we
say it
ended
did
up
because you went
raising.
back on the show.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's have gone back on the show. They wanted to come and interview us once they saw kind of how successful we were in terms of future fundraising. And we tied it back to some of the learnings I had on Shark Tank. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was just a crazy, random thing that I never expected myself to end up doing.
Yeah, you would never expect yourself to actually be feeding sharks dog food.
Yeah, exactly.
Could you
Or for them to
imagine?
eat it, right? That was
Right.
pretty funny.
Because a lot of times on that show, I don't think people think about it. When your product is food, they're gonna have to eat it.
Yeah, yeah,
And you
exactly.
got good reactions, and whether or not they said yes or no, that's something that you now have in your storybook for the 5 years, and I think anybody who launches a business, not many people make it on that show, and then long behold, get asked to come back because you were actually able to build something very successful, with your team, and, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah, it's been fun, and it continues to air. I think actually we had an airing. We're filming this for everyone on a random Tuesday, and the previous Sunday we just had like the Shark Tank airing go through, and it's funny because my phone always blows up, and
Yep. Hey,
Instagram and LinkedIn, etc. Just like, oh hey, just saw your show. So it's just really interesting how
still
people
gets aired.
continue to engage almost 4 or 5 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. When you think about now, this business is like part of your life,
Yep.
right? You are the brand essentially because you're the founder. That's like the story of an entrepreneur is that when you launch a business or you launch a product or something, your name
Mhm.
is tied to it ultimately until you decide to like take your hands off and say, I'm not the CEO anymore. I'm not the founder anymore, but it is your business. And so, where did you find, was it early on or a little later in which you found that you were pretty much the business, like Renaldo Webb equals PetPlate and vice
Yeah.
versa. When did you realize that throughout working on the business?
Yeah, I think very early on, when you're trying to get your first customer, right? And it's who's going to close the deal, right?
Yeah.
And for me, literally, who's going to go deliver the dog food?
Yeah.
Very, very quickly, I realized that, it was going to take a huge commitment from myself. And I think I wasn't necessarily 100% prepared for that when I first kind of launched the business.
Mm,
Gradually, as I got more positive feedback from our early customers, and I got more confidence in myself in terms of making decisions and that I was the right leader for this business. I just got a different level of comfort around that, and that I believe helped. But I think at a very early stage as an entrepreneur,
Mm.
it's just going to require a lot of your time and energy. And that's kind of when you decide, are you the right leader, et cetera, for this business. And I think a lot of people naturally kind of, meet that point. And if,
Yep.
their mission, vision's not completely aligned with what they want to do, they naturally take a step back, and, the business may not do nearly as well as a result. So I
Mm.
think once you hit that, first level of resistance, that's when you have to decide if you're the leader to take this vision forward.
Yeah, and that's people, they often don't think about that. When you're the founder, you discover something and you want to build a business, you
Yeah,
also have to lead the pack too.
exactly.
And there's comes a lot of pressures with that.
Hmm.
I could imagine like when you're sitting down thinking about everybody else that's on your team, it's a lot of responsibility and plus the pressure I'd mentioned just a sec ago. Like there's a lot that comes with it. How do you balance self-care in that type of lifestyle as an entrepreneur, as a founder? What does self-care look like? I know you have
Yep.
a dog
Hmm.
and a special person in your life too. So you got to make time for all these other areas that you want to find fulfilling in your life. But when your company is your baby child for the most part,
Yeah.
how do you balance all that?
And I don't think I've been, the rock star example of that. I've tried to get better over time, but I've definitely spent time periods where just the intensity that was required, yeah, and just I wasn't going to the gym nearly as much as I wanted to. The
Yeah.
meals I was making myself weren't necessarily the healthiest. But I think as I've gotten more time and experience, I've gotten a little bit better about that. And I do think it's important to kind of, take care of yourself first and foremost in a lot of ways. And with myself, being a representation of the brand, I try to make sure that I do that. So for
Hmm.
me, I find very structured workouts are very helpful. So my
Yeah.
fiance and I, we do CrossFit. We sign up for our classes at the beginning of the week. We lock them in, and we try not to change them.
Yeah.
For as best as we can. So that's been very helpful. Obviously my fiance as well. Our relationship has been great. I remember telling her on our first date, actually, about the idea of PetPlate when it was just an idea in my head. So,
Oh, wow.
she's been able to see the business evolve and grow, and she's been like just a great support system for me.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think dogs and cats as well do a lot for people. And Cooper has just been a great joy in my life. So he and our relationship just kind of, going on walks in the morning, going for a run, etc. All of that stuff again just reminds me like, oh, hey, this is what I'm trying to help people, have in their own life. It's my way of giving
Yeah.
back, right? So he kind of helps remind me of that. So I would just say make sure you're, getting in your workouts, you're trying to eat as healthy as you can, right? And I manage stress, I guess, through my relationships, through hobbies, through
Mm.
spending time with my pet. So that's how I've approached it. I'm not saying
Yep.
it's a winning formula, and I try to get better at it,
I think everybody, it's a
every
work in
day. But
progress.
yeah, exactly, it's a work in progress. I will say that post pandemic, and not post, during the pandemic, working remote has given me a lot more flexibility, and that's something we're going to build into the culture of PetPlate, I think, moving forward. So removing that, 45-minute, 50-minute, subway commute twice a day
Yeah.
has definitely been a huge help. So, that's going to be, I think, an interesting thing. We'll try to continue with that pet plate just as part of our culture. And I think that's been a help for our team members as well.
Oh, that's huge. Do you ever get overwhelmed? And if you do,
Mhm.
what is the very first thing you do? I want to get in your head here for a second because I know that you are technically driven, when
Yeah.
digitally and technically driven mentally. I'm
Mhm.
opposite. I'm very socially driven. So when I get stressed and upset, I call people and I start delegating the shit out of what's stressing me
Yeah.
out. But for you, what's the very first thing or few things that you do when you get overwhelmed within work?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, a little bit the exact opposite. I definitely get very insular as soon as I get stressed out, and I just need to go heads down. Put on the headphones and listen to some music.
Okay.
If anyone listening is also an Above and Beyond fan, nice kind of yeah,
Nice.
EDM group. I'm
Yep.
usually putting on one of their albums and just trying to start taking like some small chunks out of whatever is distracting me
Sure.
or causing me that stress. I typically realize if I'm stressed out about something, I'm resisting something.
Mm.
So I now just try to meet that head on, right? And I don't have to solve the entire problem in one go or in one sitting, but I at least try to see, is there one small thing about that problem I can address, or about this that I can kind of start progressing towards a solution. So I try to do that more, as opposed to kind of necessarily feel paralyzed. And sometimes it may actually be delegation, right? And
Yeah.
maybe I'm resisting delegating it to someone for some reason. What is that bigger reason, and how can I start to address or chip away at it? So that's kind of how I like to think about things. Outside of that, I might go get myself, some sweets. I get a sweet tooth when I get super stressed out, so you'll probably see me also eating candy. Right, is the other thing
Nice.
I'm gonna do. If I'm being completely honest. Yeah.
Man, wait, can we go back to this idea, Ronaldo, about growth? I mean, you mentioned investors. We talked about Shark Tank, which could have been potential investors at one point. But when you're looking to grow a small business, which at one point, again, is you on a bicycle delivering this food to people's houses in the Upper East Side or Upper West Side, whichever, probably both.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, both actually.
Unfortunately.
Where did your mind go, and what were some of the first steps you took to actually grow it monetarily?
Yeah. Yeah. So, obviously, as a small business, I made the decision early on. I wanted it to be a venture-backed business. I think there are a lot of ways you can fund your operation, but for me, I thought the best way to do it would be to go out and raise money, raise capital. So, first I started small, just by like, what, I'm just going to prove I can get customers and prove I can get traction. So I did that for about, 6 to 8 months, and showed that, hey, there are people that are going to buy this and they're going to keep buying it. I was able to collect information and kind of just prove it out a little bit. It was kind of the beta. At PetPlate, we've raised, north of $15 million thus far throughout the life cycle of the business. And, the first check was, a couple weeks after I was on Shark Tank, which was great. And then that was, quickly followed up by $500,000 from an institutional fund called the Brand Project. That's been very helpful in the growth and trajectory of PetPlate. So, that was kind of like one of the next steps, is finding other people that were smarter than I was, particularly in growing a digitally native brand,
Yeah.
and getting them involved. That was a fun process. It was very interesting, making the pitch deck. It requires you to really get, very detailed on and very specific on what your mission and vision is, what metrics you're seeing kind of go in the right direction, right?
Mm.
What you think the end result of your business can be. And answering those questions, I thought was a very good exercise, regardless of if you want to raise money from VCs, et cetera. But
Yeah.
that process definitely was very helpful. Then with that initial set of capital, we're able to say, let's tool the business for success. So in 2016, again, we were just in New York City. After we raised a little bit of money in 2017, we went nationwide. So that required a new manufacturing facility, no longer in the commercial kitchen. It
Yep.
required 3 distribution centers across the US,
Bet your
no
roommates were
life
happy.
around, right? So setting up that scale was hard, right? And then how do you market it across the US, and the Facebook ads and the Google ads, and finding the right people to manage that was another process. And we've kind of done it in steps, right?
Yeah.
Took a little step, we got better, now let's challenge ourselves. All right, we've now upped the game, and we just continued along that way. So we
Right.
just kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other in terms of growth, and really just trying to meet the next challenge, but do it in a sustainable way. So that's, I think, kind of the process we've been on at PetPlate.
It's all a process.
Yeah.
What do they say? You gotta baby crawl, then you get up and start walking, then you can run, then maybe you sprint, but then you gotta slow back down, then you maybe
Yeah.
gotta start baby crawling again.
Yeah.
Everything is such a process. Here comes my favorite part of this conversation, Renaldo Webb. Can you give us some advice for upcoming and growing entrepreneurs, those who are launching a business right now, who
Mhm.
feel like they're struggling to find the right investments or the right growth strategy,
Mhm.
or anybody who just wants to get started tomorrow and has this really cool idea to launch a company around candles, maybe,
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
like non-negotiables that you have, top secrets maybe, that helped you when you first got started.
Mhm. I would say really think about the problem you're trying to solve and the value you're giving to your potential customer. I think it all kind of goes back to that, right? Obviously, that's going to tie into your mission and vision, but you have to have a lot of conviction around that product and product or service that is solving a specific problem. And I would just try to be an expert on that. I had probably spent almost 2 years consulting pet food companies before I tried to start PetPlate. Right, so I had a base knowledge of the problem, what people were looking for, the market. So I think you need to give yourself that time to really build that level of expertise before you jump into something, right? Or you have an expertise around selling or something along those lines that can really support it. So that's where I would start, right? Is make sure you have that level. And then once you do, it's really just taking those each continuous progressive steps in terms of growing the business. Starting by making sure you're responding to customers' feedback and you're understanding if they are enjoying like your product or service, addressing those concerns if they're not. Once you really solve that flywheel, I feel a lot of other things can fall into place as long as you're hiring the right people and you're building, I think like a sustainable supply chain or way of delivering your product or service. So it all just goes back to the problem solution. And I would spend most of my time there before moving into everything else.
Yeah. And then when you think about all the time it takes to launch something, we're talking like maybe there's 20-hour days, maybe there's 24-hour days, who knows? You just kind of got to do what it takes. So what are your thoughts on that when especially when you first start? I'm sure now you have time to go to your CrossFit classes with your fiance, like obviously. But back then, when you want something so badly, when we
Yeah,
started this podcast, for 2 months straight, I don't think I mean, I was sleeping, but I would
yeah,
think about it as soon as I woke up,
yeah.
and I would be thinking about it before I went to bed.
Mhm.
Therefore
Need that
17
obsession.
deliverable. Right. So,
You
like,
need that.
where I guess it's a balance, but then at the same time, when you want it that bad and you're trying to get it off the ground,
Yeah.
like, there's so much that goes into it, so much time and energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a level of extreme ownership, right? It's if you really have to want it for other people to want it. So I think
Yeah.
that's probably what I would say is the most important thing is just making sure that there's a level of like obsession you have at the very beginning to fix every problem, to understand, to even understand what those problems are, and that translates to just like a certain level of ownership you're showing in
Mm,
the overall product. I think oftentimes I see people that are very passive about their ideas, and
yeah.
nothing's going to happen if you're passive about it. You really have to go out and get it and be aggressive. So that's really what I would say is kind of the make or break. You just have to attack it head on. You really have to continue to push, and you have to know it's going to be hard, and no one can explain to you what that's going to be like. You just kind of have to experience it, and you have to really want to kind of drive it forward, right? Even
Mm.
with people telling you no or you're not getting the early success you may want, because it's going to be a challenging road.
Hell yeah, it is. Amongst your other friends that are founders or CEOs, how different are all of your stories? Because I haven't met anybody else that has launched a product or a show or a line of whatever that has the same story. Because you're getting different yeses and nos, and your way, like you operate on a very different schedule, right? Everybody has such a different story.
Yeah, I think everyone has their own unique experience with it. But I would say in my group, usually when I'm hanging out with founder friends, it's always just like, oh man, that fucking sucked. X,
Right.
Y, and Z, right? It's a little bit cathartic just being able to just talk about your journeys and figure out that hey, this person also had to put in a lot of time, energy, and effort, and it paid off for them too. It's going to pay off for me.
Yeah.
So I do think having like a network of people that are trying to challenge themselves or also
Mm,
trying to start businesses is just great. Just
yeah.
for people to be supportive and to give you feedback and advice, and also to see other people's successes and know that you can have that too if you also continue to put in the time, work, and energy. So
I'm right there with you. That's why we bring founder friends on the show. That's why we're
yeah,
doing a founders week. There's 5 of you guys that have become
yeah.
friends of the show now. And listen, I think if we ever launch something in the future called Founders Friends or Founder Friends,
Hey,
hey, I think you found your first host. His name's
there you
Renaldo.
go.
Do you read
uh, you know,
or
I
try
I
to?
I am more of a I'm more of a YouTuber podcast guy
Or
than like
there?
reading of books, but
Yeah.
I consider myself reasonably well read.
It's usually one or the other because I feel like
Yeah.
when the reason I ask you is because when you think about books that you've read that have helped you along this big journey of 5 years, or I guess
Sure.
in your case, it could totally be YouTube videos or podcasts. Could you
Yeah.
give us maybe one podcast or one YouTube
Mhm.
show, maybe your channel that you focused on whenever getting through the toughest days as an entrepreneur?
Interesting. Yeah. So one of the podcasts I really like by Guy Raz is called "How I Built This." Is a very very interesting one. Goes in interviews entrepreneurs that have had very successful businesses.
Mm.
The founders of Allbirds and Stitch Fix, and you
Yeah.
really get to hear their version of PetPlate story of, hey, I just had this idea, I had two people buying it from me to now the business is worth $1 billion, right? And they kind of walk you through that entire process.
Yeah.
So I really like those kinds of podcasts. And as well, yeah, I like just kind of following current events. So I'm listening to the NPR and New York Times, and I think it's really important just to be aware of current events and trends. So you can kind of pick those up from those shows. But the How I Built This podcast is probably the most exciting one related to entrepreneurship that I listen to. So
Nice.
yeah, and
How
I've
I
been
built
thinking on
this.
my own about, like, I think there needs to be more content about helping entrepreneurs. I do think that's like a white space that maybe does not exist yet in terms of the hard skills, because there are a lot. The first
Right.
time you have to set up QuickBooks, it's like there aren't too many people there trying to help
Well, you call me when you wanna launch that podcast.
you.
Maybe
There
it's
we
called
go.
like the hard tricks of entrepreneurship or something. Who knows?
You're
Listen,
you're
every
good at
idea is a
coming up
good
with names, man. You're good. I
okay,
like.
mission and value over here. You're the one with all the good tags of the show. Where do you think you want PetPlate to go from here? You guys have
Mhm.
listen, you're nationwide. You are 5 years in an operation now. You have your hands in all the elements of it, but I'm sure your team's kicking ass no matter what. But where's your vision now? If you had to give yourself another 5 years, for
Yeah.
example, and you want a decade into this company, what
Mhm.
more do you want out of PetPlate?
I really think, for us, it comes down to our goal is 360 nutrition. We want to make sure that at Pet Plate, regardless of kind of the companion animal you have, when you think about nutrition, or you go and you get a new puppy, you get a new kitten, you realize that you can get everything your dog or cat needs to be healthy from Pet Plate in one box. Right. I
Mm,
think we want that level of brand awareness in the next 5 years. And then we also want to be able to offer that level of product and service. I
mm,
think from on the product and service angle, that's going to require us to increase the efficacy of everything that we're offering. Right now, we just have, our set of meals and some treats. We're launching a lot more this year, and that's been really exciting for us to build out.
yeah.
And then we also want to increase the accessibility. Right now, we're a fresh frozen product, so it's going to be more expensive than what you may find at the traditional pet food stores. And we want more people to realize that, human grade dog food, human grade pet food is important to the health and well being of their pets. And we want
Yeah.
more people to be able to afford it. So we want to build out those things, and we think that's going to help us then achieve that brand awareness and really
Mm,
become the first thing a new millennial or Gen Z pet parent thinks of once they
yeah.
get a pet.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah.
because food is like medicine. I'm Japanese, so I always tell people that. I'm like, listen, I treat food like it's medicine because my body's a temple. Your dog should be no different. Your cat should be no different.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's in simple things, right? Just having your dog in a healthy weight range can extend their life by 2 years.
yeah,
Anyone who's ever lost a pet, knows if you can just make those, easy daily decisions to extend their life, why not do it? And PetPlate wants to support them in
mm.
that mission.
Oh, that's great. And then for you as an entrepreneur and the founder of Pet Plate, what do you want for yourself out of all of this? I know you get a lot of satisfaction with the company and seeing its success,
Yep.
but I could only imagine like how do you want to lay your head at night and feel when thinking about how big this company is becoming now?
Yeah, I want to, I guess in terms of, falling asleep and resting well at night, I think it's knowing that we're doing right by our employees and
Mm,
our customers, like first and foremost, and just through good business practices, and working hard to make sure we're delivering the best product and service,
mm,
for our customers, and then setting up the best culture possible for our employees, right? I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, how we're thinking about how remote work has really kind of changed how we think about going back into an office, et cetera, at PetPlay. We want to make sure that we're giving people the time and energy and space they need to live a fulfilled life
Mm.
and also be very fulfilled at work and contribute at a high level. So that's all very important to me, in terms of just giving back to the people that have really supported me and my mission and vision. Personally, I also want to continue to grow. So whether it's new skills, learning from people on the team, things I mentioned earlier that I want to get better at, hiring, etc. Right. I want to make sure that I'm also growing with the company so I can
Mm.
continue to, help us meet the challenges that we're facing.
Bada boom, bada bing. Here's a teaser for the podcast that I'm going to help you launch one day. For those hard skills, Ronaldo,
Mm,
could you give us the top hard skills that an entrepreneur needs to get started?
sure. I think the first is understanding data, right? Whether it's, numerical stuff in Excel, spotting consumer trends and how to really quantify that. I think there's a data literacy problem, in
Mhm.
entrepreneurship that needs to be solved. So I think that's first and foremost. Number two, I believe will just then be how do you clearly communicate, this data metrics and understand what it means for your business. Um, Finally, number three, when you have a small team and you have to do everything, what's the basic level of literacy you need for marketing, sales, supply chain, etc. Right? You having a podcast, I'm sure there are tons of marketing metrics that right you need to be able to communicate when you're trying to sell and pitch your business to other people. Um, how do you do that in a convincing way, right? What resources are out there for you to help
Yep.
you be able to do that and do that at scale. Those are the things I really want to help people with.
If you're listening, you just got all of his top secrets. Go, go, go. Start your business. Hurry up. Leave this
Yeah.
podcast. But before you leave the podcast, we're going to send you to PetPlate. We have a promo code Men of the Hour. You guys were kind enough to give people $100 off. Am I getting that number right? Or did it say 10 and I'm just saying 100? It's $100.
$100 off, $100 off your first 4 boxes. So $25 off each box. You just go to petplate.com and enter the code man of the hour at checkout. It will also include, a little bit off on your treats as well.
That's incredible. Wait, so can humans eat this? I might just go buy it myself now because you
Yeah.
mentioned if the sharks are eating it on that show, I might actually go try it for myself just so that I can say I've had dog food. I've never tried dog food.
It's 100% human grade. So we're literally only using ingredients you find at a grocery store. We're using the same ingredients that are going into the human food at our manufacturer. So you can definitely eat it. I would say, I don't know if you're a big fan of liver, but if you like liver, like you'll
I know it's
also like
good for you.
that. So that's the one thing I'll say, you have some sriracha with you and be prepared to taste a little bit of liver and then you're good.
If not for you, for your pets, my friends, everybody listening, thanks for being here with us. Renaldo Webb, thank you for trailblazing what we're considering to be an extended part and of the family at the Men of the Hour community for Founders Week. You were the first. And I
Oh,
can't thank you enough for being here, for sharing your story, your tips and tricks, and even letting us know of that one podcast that got you through those hard days, man. And the journey in and of itself is something that I think is incredibly valuable. But cheers to your 5 years and the five to come. And I'm really excited to chat with you in a decade and see where PetPlate is from there.
yeah.
And I'll probably actually see you closer to time rather than 5 years from now.
Yeah.
But thank you for letting us coin you the man of the hour on this episode of the Men of the Hour podcast, buddy.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.